Welcome to the Triple Threat Podcast. My name is William Ezel, and joining alongside me today is the new face of the Triple Threat family, is Ishan.
What's up, guys?
And we have a very special guest on the show today. We have a NBA.com writer, Sekou Smith, on the podcast today. We got a big show today, starting off with some NBA, then we'll go to some NFL. Big show. So, Sekou, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, guys. How are you?
Better than normal.
Excellent, yeah.
So, let's start it off with some NBA. And what I've noticed with the Lakers is that there hasn't been a clear diagnosis on their players' injuries with the recovery timeline. And Luke Walton isn't fully in the loop on the news of these injuries and their player decisions. And what I've noticed as well is that the young players' growth has been very stagnant with the Lakers. And when players like Julius Randle leave and D'Angelo Russell leave, they blossom into a lot better players. How much of the Lakers' failures do you place on the health and developmental staff?
Look, I think the Lakers' issues this year have been due to the injury to one guy, not all those other guys. It's been LeBron's injury and the time that he missed derailed whatever plans they had for the season. Anytime you lose the best player in basketball for that duration of time, it's going to complicate matters for you when you have a young roster the way the Lakers have been put together. You can point fingers in every direction if you want to. You can look around and say, well, if this had happened, maybe things would be different. But every team can do that. The fact of the matter is, the minute LeBron James went down for as long as he did, which was as long as he's ever been out of the lineup in his career, the Lakers season was sacked.
Do you think LeBron didn't really know how to recover from an injury of this severity?
I'm very curious to find out in retrospect how much of the severity of the injury took him by surprise. He's a guy who's never been seriously hurt like that. But I think at 34 years old, that same injury where he 24, the recovery time might have been much different. And I'm speaking from experience. I'm older than LeBron. I know how long it takes you to bounce back from something when you're younger as compared to when you get older. And yeah, that was new territory for LeBron in terms of being hurt like that and having to recover from it, and then watch your team's season go down the drain as you're trying to fight to get back.
And we saw this when he came back to Cleveland. He had a little slump there, didn't really adjust properly, went back to Miami, came back, playoff mode LeBron, as you would call it, came back in Cleveland. Do you think LeBron should put in playoff mode and try to get the Lakers to the playoff, or should they abandon this season?
Yeah, look, the math isn't good. They're not going to make the playoffs, barring a miracle winning streak. If I were LeBron and the Lakers, I would sit down and talk about shutting him down for the season, to be honest with you. He's played to the last day of the season for 8 straight years. That extra 2.5 months of recovery time that he could get, as the Lakers don't make the postseason and go about trying to retool their roster, is invaluable. I know fans hate it because there are people who bought tickets to come and watch him play, but I would imagine you feel much better about the Lakers season next year if LeBron is refreshed and healthy and 100% ready to go in the future.
And what do you think their ceiling is for next season with LeBron fully healthy?
We won't know until they get some more pieces on that roster. Free agency, the draft, free agency are humongous. The draft lottery is huge for the Lakers, based on where they land. I know there'll be conspiracy theorists out there that think if they don't make the playoffs, they're going to get the number 1 pick and get, they're going to get the number 1 pick and save their season and save the future. But let's not go there yet. Let's wait and see what happens. And then once you know where they fit in the lottery and then what they can do in free agency, then we can give a better assessment of exactly what the Lakers' future looks like.
If you're the Lakers, do you use that pick to trade for Anthony Davis, or do you hold on to it to keep another young asset to the team?
Depends on what pick it is. If it's a top 3 pick, you have to seriously think about holding on to it. Think about the type of talent you can get with one of those top 3 picks. But anything, outside of that, and they'll have a minuscule chance of getting the number one pick, of course. But if you can get Zion Williamson, obviously, if he's going to be the number one pick in this draft, you hold on to it. I think R.J. Barrett would fit in the same category. I'm less confident about John Morant. I think he's a guy who's intriguing, but we're not 100% sold on exactly what kind of pro he's going to be. Anything outside of that, you gotta set your sights on established stars in the league. If you're the Los Angeles Lakers.
What free agency pushes do you see the Lakers making? Because I've heard a lot about Klay Thompson. Do you see anyone else, potentially Kyrie Irving?
If I'm the Lakers, I'm doing a full court press on all those guys. You got to go out there and be aggressive and try and recruit the elite of the elite. If you're the Lakers, you don't have leeway to do anything other than go after the best on the market, and that means even guys like Kevin Durant who've expressed certain sentiment about not wanting to play with the Lakers or not wanting to play in that fishbowl that comes with being LeBron's teammate. But to me, if you're the Lakers, the responsible thing to do is to make a list of the top free agents out there, pick out the top 5, and go after them. And the pursuit of Anthony Davis this summer will obviously be a factor, but I don't think you can dance with the Pelicans, throughout that process either. Your business has to be done in a certain amount of time because of the free agency rules. So if Anthony Davis is not happening, if you're the Lakers, you got to move on quickly.
And if you're a general manager for the Lakers, say if you're Pelinka, how much would you give up to get Anthony Davis this summer if you don't sign any free agents?
My offer would be the same one that we all heard was on the table this year, leading up to the trade deadline. Depending on my draft pick and where it lands, that could be included as well. But there's not much else you can do. You offer them all of your young talent. You put every one of those young guys up, and even though Jenny Buss said you didn't, to me you can't really start that conversation unless you have those talented young guys the Lakers have as part of the package. So you start there, and if New Orleans doesn't want to deal, you move on.
Do you think the new general manager will rethink about the offer that they received in January?
I'm sure he will, and I'm sure they'll consider whatever else comes in from Boston and whoever else dives in to the Anthony Davis sweepstakes. It's going to be kind of a reset for everybody in that trade discussion. And the Lakers will be prominent in it, but I don't know that they're a slam dunk. I think everybody just assuming it's going to happen is naive. These things don't always go the way they're planned to. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if Anthony Davis ends up somewhere else.
My take on it is that if I'm the Pelicans, I'm going to accept the Lakers offer. Although the Celtics have a better young core than the Lakers, I believe that the developmental staff on the Lakers isn't quality, and I think that in the future, if the Lakers find a better situation in New Orleans, I think they will blossom into better players than what the Celtics players can be. Just looking at Julius Randle and D'Angelo Russell blossoming into potential 6th Man of the Year and all-star players, it's been a big difference from leaving LA for these young players.
I totally agree with that. I think that Ingram still has a very high ceiling, and same with Lonzo and Kuzma. And I think giving them a bigger role with a better developmental staff will only increase their potential.
I tend to agree with you guys. Actually, I think the amount of player development that you can do once LeBron shows up is mitigated because your clock accelerates. You're trying to win right now instead of winning, 2 years from now. Mm-hmm. So that does impact it, but yeah, if you look at the way Julius Randle has blossomed, with the Pelicans, and certainly D'Angelo Russell becoming an all-star, that's as much about those guys and their talent as it is about player development with the Lakers. Had they stayed on that Lakers roster, who knows what kind of space they'd be in now as players. So I don't want to knock the Lakers staff completely, but yeah, you have to be very cautious about giving up young talent because you don't know 100% how they're going to perform if they get into a new space.
So do you blame the Lakers' failures on LeBron's hands-off approach to the development of younger players and his lack of leadership?
No, I blame it on his groin and the fact that the minute he went down with that injury on Christmas, the calculus for the Lakers season changed dramatically. But no, I don't think there's anything malicious on LeBron's part or anything coordinated or calculated by the organization. It's just unfortunate. You can't factor in how significant injuries can be on a season until you have them and have to deal with them.
Because LeBron elevates the players around him, and when he went down with the injuries, they were hovering around the third seed in the West, and they were looking very promising to go. And some people were even saying they could make it to the finals, although that was a stretch. Some people were even saying that, and that injury really did set them back a lot.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can nitpick LeBron all you want, but you can't argue with his results. The last 8 years, he's taken teams that to me had no business playing for championships, several of them, to the finals. And you can't erase that from his ledger. This just happens to be one of those unfortunate deals where his body failed him in this one instance, and it changed the Lakers season dramatically.
Where do you rank this Lakers team on the great teams LeBron has played with? Where does this team stack up?
They don't rank as great at all. I mean, you got to go back and look at the teams that he was on that didn't make the playoffs, and there's only been 3 in his career. That they get to get on that list, which is nowhere you want to be, but that's the list they're on, and it's not a friendly one. I thought they were ill-conceived as a unit, and they're paying for it now. Is basically what it is.
Is this team better than the Cavs team last season LeBron led to the finals?
No, I don't think they are. I think there were more veterans, more quality vets on that team last year, and you can't underestimate how important it is to have veteran players in key positions when you're talking about playing deep into the playoffs. Now, they may have more young talent on this Lakers team, but certainly weren't a better team overall.
When it comes to LeBron's teammates around him, how do you what's your opinion on shooters? How important are they to LeBron and his playmaking abilities? Because on the Lakers right now, there's not really a consistent shooter compared to on the Cavs when you had Korver, Kyrie, or even J.R. Smith.
They're critical. I mean, they've always been a huge component, on a LeBron-led team, having quality shooters surrounding him. That was the one knock a lot of us noticed on this team, that they didn't go out and fill the roster with those kinds of guys, with those typical LeBron types that he's always had with him, and it cost him. We'll see what they do in terms of retooling, but I would imagine that's going to be a high priority for the future, is to make sure you have the right complement of talent around LeBron, as well as guys who fit financially, in terms of being the best possible supporting cast you can have for him.
How much do you think the Lakers would have improved in the Eastern Conference than in the West?
Look, you can play that game, but the East is a lot better at the top than it has been in the past. I wouldn't disparage the Eastern Conference right now. I think the East is stronger in terms of legitimate teams. The East can go 5 deep with teams you can see playing for a championship. I don't know that I see that in the West.
I was just using that as a segue to talk about the Celtics, and you've said that they need to sort out their minutes issues. So how would you, as Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens, sort out the minutes for the Celtics?
Well, the toughest thing for the Celtics is figuring out who has to get squeezed in the rotation. You got so much talent, but only so much time to get everybody integrated into your rotation. They've got plenty of bodies at a couple of light positions on the wing and in the backcourt. So you got Gordon Hayward, Marcus Smart, Kyrie, Terry Rozier. You got all these guys fighting for minutes. Jason Tatum, kind of at the same spots. And that's up to Brad Stevens to figure out how to make that work for everybody involved. So, the first thing you got to do is find out who does and does not fit into the rotation in a given series and go from there. But those are hard decisions that Brad Stevens has to make above everybody else.
As of right now, what role would you give Gordon Hayward heading into the playoffs? Because as you know, there's been some speculations about him hindering Jaylen Brown and Tatum's development. Would you give him a bigger role, or would you keep him as a bench piece, or even minimize his role?
I think he's best used as a bench piece right now. You just don't know how much you can get from him. Um, he's looked great, obviously, on this West Coast trip. 30 points against the Warriors, game winner, in their next outing. And you know the talent that's there, but you don't know how he's going to hold up physically in a playoff series. So what you do is you're somewhat cautious right now, but you're optimistic that he'll be able to get back to the Gordon Hayward you're used to having.
I mean, we saw Gordon Hayward play at a high level during the NCAA tournament. Although it's a different talent level, it is a similar amount of pressure on a player, and he handled that pretty well, getting his Butler team to the final against Duke and missing the game-winning half-court shot.
No, I'm not worried about Gordon Hayward's makeup as a player, but given the injury he's coming off of in the situation he's been dealing with, trying to get back to all-star level Gordon Hayward, you got to give him some leeway physically to get into that space where he was when he's at his best. I mean, people forget, act like he wasn't, the big, huge free agent acquisition that the Celtics got a couple of years ago. That, again, he's a prime example of what I was talking about with LeBron. Injuries change the game, man. It takes a great plan and implodes it. The unfortunate, unforeseen injury. His was obviously much more significant than LeBron's. But it's just a reminder that you're at the mercy of circumstance a lot of times in this league, and nothing's ever going to change that.
Having faced a similar fracture myself, it is a long recovery to get back to your former self, and even though his was more severe, as mine was an arm and his was a leg, but that's a hard injury to come back from, and it could be a career ender. Do you ever see him coming back from an injury of this type?
Yeah, I mean, guys look, if Paul George can suffer the injury he did and get back to playing the way he was and beyond, I mean, he's a legitimate MVP candidate. If you can do that, if you can come back the way Paul George did, then anything's possible.
How far do you think the Celtics can make it this playoffs? Because Kyrie does have a lot of playoff experience, but some fans are doubting his ability to lead this Celtics team.
I think they can get to the finals. I think they're that talented. It's a matter of them putting it all together, of course. But I think just on the hoof, if you look at talent in the Eastern and Western Conference, Boston ranks up there in terms of raw talent right there with anybody. They've got as much talent as you would need to compete for a championship. Do they have the chemistry, to put that all together and be an elite team is the question.
What team do you think they match up against well, and what team do you think matchups against them unfavorably in this Eastern Conference?
I don't think there's one that's a bad match for them necessarily. I think they've got the right complement of talent at every position to be competitive against whoever. I think their issue is not talent; it's more chemistry, and a lot of pressure is going to be on Brad Stevens' shoulders to make the right decisions with his rotation and to keep these guys locked into roles. Because if you get out of step, there are teams in the East now that can trip you up and knock you off of your path, and certainly the Warriors are good enough to beat anybody.
So, if the Celtics don't make the finals, who do you think is making it out of the East?
I think Milwaukee has to be on anybody's list of favorites. I think certainly Toronto has everything you need to be a team that comes out of the East, and Philadelphia, I'm not as confident about. Indiana, I'm not as confident about. But Toronto and Milwaukee certainly look like finals-type teams to me.
How do you think the Sixers will line up next season with Jimmy Butler and Tobias' expiring contracts? Do you think one or both of them will leave the team?
Well, they've got to decide, if they want to take that leap financially. I could see one. I have a hard time seeing how they keep both. I think Tobias Harris is a much more plug-and-play type talent on any roster. Jimmy Butler requires a little bit more massaging. And if I had my choice, I think I'd rather have Tobias.
And with Jimmy's comments after the game or during the game against the Bulls, it's easy to see how he can fall out of favors with Brett Brown and easily leave the team this summer. And with this extra cap space they'd have if he was to leave, who do you think the Sixers will use to sign him?
I have no idea, in terms of what they would target, in terms of types of players. You almost wouldn't need to. Bringing Tobias Harrison gave him an option. To me, you pick one or the other. And if you have to move on from whoever you don't keep, that makes it easy for you as the Sixers because, you got some flexibility now having Tobias Harrison there where you're not beholden to Jimmy Butler in the postseason. You don't have to worry about him holding you hostage as an organization, wanting certain things, wanting a certain salary or certain conditions, wanting to be the man on a team. Well, let's be honest, Joel Embiid should be your anchor. He's the guy that should be the face of that franchise. And these other guys should be quality supporting pieces for somebody who could be a legitimate MVP candidate.
So how much does Embiid's injury history and fatigue problem, along with Ben Simmons' unwillingness to shoot the three, limit the Sixers' ceiling?
It gives them issues because, again, that thing we've been talking about, injuries is always a problem. If you've got a history of being injured the way Joel Embiid does and missing the kind of time he has, that makes you nervous. And, the fact that he's sitting out now, he's coming back this week, but the fact that he had to sit out coming out of All-Star Weekend makes you nervous. It's something that's always going to be there. As far as Ben Simmons' shot, guys, everybody ends up, polishing their weaknesses as players in this league sooner or later. And I think Ben Simmons will have an opportunity to do just that over the next couple of years. But right now, it's a glaring hole in his game, and one you have to compensate for by having other shooters on the floor.
Do you think Embiid playing in the All-Star game hurts his chances of coming back to the same degree he was before the injury?
Yes. I think, and from what I've gathered, there have been some people within the organization who warned against him playing. They felt like his knee needed the rest. But he wanted to be a part of All-Star Weekend and display out there with the other best players in the world. And it got the better of him. And that's why he's had to sit the way he has.
If the Raptors don't make it out of the East, do you see Kawhi leaving them? And if so, what team do you think Kawhi will target this offseason?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's better or worse for them, having a big-time season for Kawhi. I think his mind is made up about testing free agency no matter what. And now it's a matter of if he's serious about going to L.A. and being in Los Angeles, there's nothing the Raptors could do short of winning the title to keep him in Toronto. So it really comes down to what's in Kawhi's heart. And I think for whatever reason, he just wants to be back in L.A., not necessarily with the Lakers, maybe even with the Clippers. And if that's the case, you took your swing if you're Toronto, and you see how it works out in the playoffs, but you don't make any lasting plans with Kawhi Leonard being the centerpiece of what you're doing.
I thought before the NBA trade deadline that the Raptors should have gone all out, hit or miss with getting a trade for Anthony Davis, because this would solidify them as the best team in the East and a legitimate title contender. If they kept both of them, how much do you think or if they managed to get both of them, do you think they would be able to win, and do you think they'd be able to retain both of their services?
No, I don't think they would have been able to keep both of them, obviously, and it would have taken a huge leap for them to get the Anthony Davis sweepstakes. And it would have been all a huge gamble, even bigger than just Kawhi. And, Masai Ujiri took a huge gamble trading away DeMar DeRozan the way he did. To ask him to do it again and get Anthony Davis would have been just an undertaking that I don't think any organization should have to go through. Look, the Raptors, they were the first team to really strike in terms of, in the Eastern Conference, making a game-changing move by getting Kawhi. They can't foresee what happens down the road when Philly goes out and tries to do the same thing, or some of those other teams, Boston, whatever they're going to do this year in free agency. But Toronto did themselves justice, going out and getting Marc Gasol, they've done enough to put themselves in a position to be the best team in the Eastern Conference this year come playoff time. And if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, they know they took the swing. It didn't work, and now they can move on.
Do you think Nick Nurse is the answer for their playoff struggles under Dwayne Casey? And do you think he and Kawhi will instill a winning culture in the Toronto area, who had been losing in the first and second rounds consistently before they arrived?
I don't think it was a coaching thing. I don't know that Dwayne Casey was the issue for the Raptors in the playoffs last year. I think it had more to do with LeBron James standing at the end of the hallway, blocking their pass. And now that LeBron's gone, it's wide open for everybody. But I don't think it was a coach situation. I think that was more about the LeBron factor for everybody in the East. You know, he had an 8-year stranglehold on that thing, and it made it difficult for anybody to get through that wasn't on his team. So Nick Nurse could be the answer. I don't think Kawhi is a long-term piece for Toronto, so I don't think it would make sense for them to be plotting and planning around Kawhi for the long term either.
Where do the Raptors go after the season?
No, there's no telling because we just don't know what the future holds. But I do think their player development component has been so good. You know, you got another young up-and-coming star in Pascal Siakam. Fred VanVleet, when healthy, is a guy you can lean on. So, I mean, they got some star power, potential star power in the pipeline. They don't need to do anything crazy after this season. They got to be measured in their approach and how they move forward.
So if Kawhi does leave for, let's say, the Clippers, where do you see Pascal Siakam's future and development? Because I know he's a very bright young star, and he needs to fix his playmaking and some other factors to really get him to the next level. Do you see him as an all-star player in 2 to 3 years?
I think that's the potential that he holds. A lot of that depends on what kind of talent's around him, what his role is on that Raptors team. But he's certainly shown us this year that he's got the dynamic potential to be an all-star at some point in his career. He's so much better now than he was a couple years ago. It's stunning. And that's what opportunity will do for you. A fresh set of eyes on the situation. Maybe under Dwayne Casey, he wouldn't have taken this leap. That's where the change in coaching to me comes into play more than anything. It's just a different set of eyeballs on some of the same talents you have.
And Siakam's development on the offense has been exponential this season, with his development of that spin move that he has mastered around the rim. That has really served him well this current season. And do you think he could ever reach an All-NBA team? And if so, do you think that would be with the Raptors, or would he have to go somewhere else?
I mean, sure. There's always a potential that anytime you get into the All-Star mix, there's an opportunity for you to make All-NBA teams. And I think he's a keeper for the Raptors. I mean, for him to come up in that system, they'd be nuts not to make sure they hold on to Pascal Siakam for as long as foreseeable future. In the foreseeable future.
If you're a general manager in the league, who are you taking number 1, 2, and 3 in this year's draft?
I think Zion Williamson has set himself apart as the number 1 pick just from a physical standpoint and, the unprecedented nature of a player that size with that kind of heft and that kind of skill set. He's kind of a no-brainer number 1 pick. I love R.J. Barrett's game, and I've loved it since I watched him play for the Canadian national team a couple years ago. And I think Cam Reddish is another talent, guy who could end up being potentially a lot better at the next level than he is even in college in the role he has right now with Duke. So, to me, those 3 guys from Duke would be hard to overlook at those top 3 spots. I think John Morant has gained a lot of steam, but I'm still in the investigative stages of trying to figure out exactly what type of player I think he's going to be.
I think Cam Reddish's role in college has really set him apart to be a humble player in the NBA because he hasn't even led a team yet, and I think he'd be able to be a third option on a championship team and be willing to take a lower role in order to win championships.
I mean, look, every one of those young guys that's coming into the league has to be ready and prepared to earn his stripes at the NBA level. There's no doubt about that. So that is one of the things that is part of the transition for any player, no matter how talented you are. I look at Marvin Bagley and how talented he is. He went to a Sacramento team that already had young players who had stepped up and filled leadership roles, so he's having to earn his bit a little bit differently. And of course, the late season injury doesn't help, but he's starting to come starting to play a lot better. But the NBA is not just about talent; it's about fit and your work ethic and whether or not you're capable of coming in and making the transition from one level to the next and staying, at that talent level, as an elite level talent.
So speaking of Zion Williamson, do you think his draft stock will improve if he comes back for the ACC
I don't
tournament?
think it changes one bit. I don't think it changes at all. If he doesn't play another second in a Duke uniform, or if he comes back and plays in the ACC tournament, I think he's the number one pick regardless.
And he said before he came to Duke that he came to Duke to play. What is your response to people who believe that he should have skipped college? Because obviously his stock rose as a consensus number one pick when he came to Duke, and in college he shows his talent against higher competition. And if you look at the top 10 high school prospects versus the top 10 college prospect, it changes completely because it solidifies who's good against talent from the next level.
Yeah.
I don't think that the 6 to 8 months he spends on a college campus dramatically changes anything unless he gets a severe injury or he gets exposed as not being the talent and the player we thought he was. And his injury has been significant, but I don't think it's been severe. And he certainly showed himself to be an elite level talent like we thought. So I really think it only helps, if you go to college and put yourself on display for, a year or a season. But I'm a proponent of guys being able to come straight out of high school. I don't think we need to waste time for the kids or for colleges. But the facade of them being student athletes, if really all they're there for is a 6 to 7 month bid to get themselves prepared for the NBA.
And I think before in the early 2000s when they were allowed to go straight from high school, it was a lot more boom or bust. And I think the college really highlights players that aren't ready for the next level. I don't think there's any upside in going to college and rising your draft stock. I think college more weeds out the lower talent in the draft.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you can go to college for 4 years and be a superstar in college and not be ready for the NBA if your game and your skills don't translate. So it's not about the system as much as it is about the player. Think about all the guys who were great college players who just never translated to the next level. And there's no disrespect in that. There's no shame in being great at one level and being a role player or not being great at the next. It's just the way it is. But I think to blame the system in any way, shape, or form is short-sighted by a lot of people.
So in this upcoming draft, who do you think has the highest floor, and who do you think has the highest ceiling?
You're talking about players?
Yeah, players. Prospects.
I'll be honest with you. I haven't studied the entire draft as intently as I will in the coming months. So, that's a tougher question for me. I think Zion obviously has the ceiling that everybody's looking for. And I think RJ Barrett fits right there, right behind him, right there on a level almost equal with him. And as far as the floor, I don't know. I haven't studied the draft hard enough yet to know where some of these other guys fit, to be honest with you.
Do you think some of these hyper-athletic players have a harder time adjusting to the NBA as they've coasted so far off their great talent and haven't really had to work for anything? Like Andrew Wiggins, for example. Because I feel like the players that have had to work for and have the mentality have a better correlation to the NBA and being successful in the NBA.
Look, don't let anybody trick you into believing that these guys aren't working their tails off. Once you get to the NBA level, the work ethic changes dramatically. If you're not capable or willing to dial it up, the league will dispense of you. Look, Wiggins is putting in work, and I love that people think he isn't or he doesn't have the kind of work ethic you want, but he's putting in the work. Guys, sometimes, as good as you might be, there are other guys that are just better than you. There are other guys who are on your level or better, and you have to wait your turn and continue to work until you can get on that next level. So I don't think anybody can survive in the NBA. I don't care how talented you are. I don't think you can survive without putting in the work. I think that's a myth that a lot of guys think talent is going to get you through at the next level when that's just not the case.
I think it's unfair to put such high expectations on players like Zion and Andrew Wiggins as they really can't live up to it without being a transcendent talent.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been labeled as a bust, Andrew Wiggins, although he's been putting up good numbers, and if he was a lower pick in the draft, he would be considered as a steal. But since he had such high expectations on him, he wasn't been able to fulfill what he was supposed to be. Do Do you think Zion will have the same struggle with these high and lofty expectations fans and the media put onto him?
Like the LeBron comparisons, or for Wiggins, the Kobe Bryant, and even Michael Jordan comparisons.
Look, you're always going to have comparisons. Player comparisons are the bane of the existence of talent coming into the NBA and any other sport, but more so the NBA than any other one, because there's always well, he reminds me of this guy or that guy, or he looks like this guy or that guy. If you can't measure up to those external expectations, that means your internal expectations for yourself probably weren't as high as they should have been. And we're talking about guys who have the elite level of talent when they're drafted in lottery and high-end drafts. We're not talking about run-of-the-mill individuals. We're talking about the best of the best. So the onus for becoming a player who lives up to the hype is based on how much hype you're putting on yourself. And to me, if you're not putting a huge amount of it on your own shoulders and then working to live up to it, that's a flaw in your system, in your character, not in the external expectations that are out there for you.
Going on to the offseason, who do you think is going to be this year's biggest winner into the NBA offseason? Who is going to win the 2019 offseason?
Whoever gets Kevin Durant. And I mean that. There's all this talk about Anthony Davis and Klay Thompson and all these other players, but if Kevin Durant is on that market and you got an opportunity to get him and you get him, you're the team that's come away with the real prize of the summer of 2019. Now, if he stays with the Warriors, then the Warriors win the offseason. If he goes elsewhere, if he goes to the Clippers, if he goes to the Knicks, one of those teams ends up winning the offseason. Because even if you get a combination of players, getting a guy who's done what Durant has done the past couple of years, that sets you apart. That puts you in a different stratosphere in terms of chasing championships. If you don't believe me, ask the Golden State Warriors.
I think going to Golden State was the perfect decision. I think it'd be crazy for him to leave because it's a perfect setup for him as a person and as a player, and he gets to go out there and play. But the media's put such harsh pressures on him by saying that he's soft and going to a championship team. Do you think by leaving Golden State and going to the Knicks or someone else would really elevate his legacy as a player, or do you think he should stay in Golden State and try to get a quadruple peat and become one of the only players in the NBA to have done that?
I think winning is the only thing that bolsters his legacy. And if he's got an opportunity to continue to do it with the Warriors, that's where he needs to do it. Going somewhere else and helping rebuild a franchise, or helping repair a franchise, but if you don't get him to a championship level, what's the point? So it's about the challenge Kevin Durant wants to take on at this stage of his career, whether or not he wants to go somewhere else to start fresh, or whether he wants to continue to win at the highest level with a team and with an organization that's shown you they know how to do it in ways no one else of this generation can. But if you're worried about your legacy and what it's going to be 20 years from now, and you're Kevin Durant, you're focusing on the wrong things in free agency. You should be focused on what's best for you to win now in the prime of your career above all things.
So, speaking of the New York Knicks, how should they plan to handle this offseason with their high draft pick that could potentially be number 1 and 2 max slots? Because we've heard a lot about Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and some of the other big-name free agents heading over to New York. How are they going to handle this offseason with the immense amount of hype built around them?
They're going for it, which is exactly what they should do. And you don't need a degree from MIT to figure that out. I mean, you trade Kristaps Porzingis to clear space to go after, players that can come in and help you now, and then you cross your fingers and hope that draft pick falls where you need it to help you transform your organization overnight. Now, it's always a risk. It's never guarantees in this business, but they put themselves in the right kind of position, to pounce on the opportunity that could await them once we know what the draft order is and once free agency is. But yeah, you go for the biggest names possible. That's the point. If you're going to be in the free agency sweepstakes with money to spend, you're not doing it so you can get role players. You're doing it so you can get stars, because stars are the quickest way for you to transform yourself from a lottery team into a contender. And the Knicks should be doing that just like everybody else who's going to have some flexibility this summer.
Yeah, I mean, the NBA is a players-driven league, and we've seen the Knicks do this before by clearing contract spots to sign somebody and then going and overpaying some so they're not being able to get any big name free agents and then being impatient and using that extra cap on spending a big contract on like Trey Burke or Tim Hardaway. Do you think the Knicks will be able to acquire a max contract slot? And who do you think this player would be, if any, that the Knicks would be able to sign?
Well, you just look at the list of names. I mean, Jimmy Butler, you start, talking about Plan Bs. Every guy on that list, 1 through 10, in terms of the top free agents, are the guys you're going to be targeting from the Knicks. If KD and Kyrie Irving aren't going to take your money, then you go down that list and keep searching until you find the right guys who will. And I think that people forget there are going to be over 200 players in the league will be free agents in July. That is a massive number. There are over, I think, 18 to 20 teams who are going to have significant, cash to spend on the free agent market. That means it's going to be a Wild West, out there on the free agent market this summer. And if you're the Knicks, with the money and resources you've freed up and the platform you provide as the biggest media market, you need to be as aggressive as possible. That means every big name that's on that free agent list is a guy that you should be making contact with.
So, if you were the GM of the Knicks, would you trade their top pick along with some other young assets, such as, let's say, Kevin Knox or Mitch Robinson, to acquire someone like Anthony Davis to help attract free agents like Kyrie, Durant, or Jimmy Butler?
Of course, why wouldn't you? I mean, the name of the game is talent acquisition. If you get the best available talent by putting together a trade that includes whatever resource you have, you'd be a nut not to use them. I mean, that's just common sense.
What's a more effective way of gaining these high-end talent? Is it through the draft or through free agency?
Luck. You got to get lucky. I mean, I remember going to Cleveland and covering games before LeBron James showed up. And the arena was a ghost town. It's one of the worst road trips in the league. You get lucky and LeBron falls in your lap as the Cleveland Cavaliers, and it transforms an organization, the history of an organization, a city, in the league. I mean, you got the biggest thing you can do in any endeavor, in certainly in professional sports, is blind luck. And I don't mean that to be disrespectful to teams that have done it different ways. But if you're talking about what's the most fortuitous thing for you, it's just get the number 1 pick in the year when there's a transcendent player at number 1.
And then this luck makes it all the more impressive how these dynasties have been formed throughout,
Exactly.
like the Lakers, like the
Warriors.
Bulls, and the Warriors, how they've been able to form these great teams through
the
luck
draft.
in the draft and through great free agency pushes. And how much do you think the big markets have an advantage over smaller markets like OKC and New Orleans on acquiring this top-end talent? Because as we've seen, talent is what brings championships because it's more of a players-driven league, and coaches are less important than leagues such as the NFL, where coaching makes a lot more of a difference versus different franchises.
I don't agree that coaching is less important, because I think when you're talking about winning titles, you do have to have the right coach to fit your team. But what I think is important is, if in the absence of some of that blind luck where you just get your hands on a transcendent player at number 1, you have to have the vision that the Warriors had of what Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green could be. You have to have the patience to allow that to grow organically and then do the right things when it's time to add pieces to it. I mean, it's such a complicated matrix of what you're trying to do in terms of building a championship team. Being competitive is one thing.
Yeah,
Making the playoffs, that's one thing. Winning titles is a completely different galaxy.
I totally agree with that. Like, to use the Warriors as an example, they were in the playoff mix in the early 2010s, but they would never ascend and get to the conference finals. But I think what's important is they allowed their players to develop, and they allowed a team chemistry to build, and they got the right coach.
Look, guys, let's be honest. They made plenty of mistakes, too. They gave Andrew Speedman $66 million. He didn't even blink. I mean, there were players that they were paying before they became the Warriors we see now that we'd all shrug at and say, what are they doing? So sometimes it's about making good decisions as an organization and then seeing them through, right? They got lucky. Nobody predicted Steph would be a 2-time MVP in this league. I don't think anybody knew for sure Klay Thompson or Draymond Green would be multiple-time All-Stars
Especially
when they were coming into the league. sometimes things happen at the right time and in the right place, and you're lucky enough to be in a position to take advantage of it.
American sports is a copycat league, and we've seen the Atlanta Hawks try to replicate the exact system the Warriors have tried to use.
With their GM Travis Schlenk, who was the Warriors' assistant GM.
And taking their developmental staff and their health trainer, I forget her name, but she was a very important part in building the Warriors' chemistry. But do you think that using this mold will be successful in the future, or is this a unique thing and teams are start looking to not build the exception but find the norm? But we've seen in the NFL, people try to find the next Sean McVay, but he's the outlier. When they're not going to find something like the outlier Sean McVay, they're going to find something more like the norm, like a Pete Carroll.
Well, look, I think you'd be foolish not to look at a championship template and try and follow it. I mean, that would go for anybody. I mean, when I'm going about my daily business, am I going to follow something that wasn't successful? Am I going to follow the path of something that bore fruit? You know, and that makes sense just from an organizational standpoint. To go out and try and, completely and exactly replicate something that happened elsewhere, that's not giving respect to the variables that are involved and all the different things that can go sideways and all the different types of talent that are involved in player acquisition and team building in the NBA. So, yeah, what he's doing in terms of the recognition and the identification of the type of players he wants to build around, that makes sense. But John Collins was already here. Which, there are other pieces that might be in place that already exist that change the way you look at it as a guy who's building a team. I think it's a smart approach. Take what worked, from what you saw with the Warriors and apply it to the Hawks. But you also have to have some originality in how you build. And you got to have the right stroke for this market, for your organization, for your ownership, in order to make it work.
How much do players and staff members contribute to a championship culture in a city? Because we've seen in Phoenix, it has become a losing culture there, and Devin Booker was tired of losing, what you say at the beginning of the season, and even though they had the talent to compete and maybe break 30 or 40 wins this season, they have become stagnant with around, they're going to end with around 20 wins and the worst record in the West.
I would argue that I don't think they have the kind of talent that suggests they should be a 40-win team. They have a lot of pieces, but it's disjointed. It hasn't been the kind of cohesive operation in Phoenix that you want to build for the long term in terms of winning. They had that when Robert Sarver took over. They've lost that since he's been the owner of that team.
Moving on to the Lakers, how do you think they will build towards this offseason? Because obviously they're trying to gain these free agent assets, but it's looking more and more likely that they're not going to get anything. If they don't get a free agent this offseason, how will they handle the 2019-20 season?
Well, if you got a crystal ball I don't know how you figure they're not going to get anything in free agency. I mean, they went out last summer and got the biggest free agent you could possibly bag in LeBron James. I don't know why anybody would assume they're going to come away empty-handed this time around.
And obviously, if you look at, they tried to sign, they didn't even have a meeting with Paul George. They were focused on getting LeBron James. Do you think that this team would be completely different if they held a meeting with Paul George, who looked interested in coming back home to LA, but when he formed a foundation with Russell Westbrook, he decided to come back? How much do you think that the LeBron factor helped in deciding not to hold a meeting with Paul George?
I mean, LeBron wasn't on that roster when Paul George was available, so I don't think we can pin that on LeBron or put that on LeBron. That was a calculation the Lakers made to not trade for Paul George, and they paid for it, by him going elsewhere and finding a niche, in Oklahoma City. But I don't know that that's something you can lay at the feet of LeBron James. What you have to do if you're the Lakers is do your homework, do your diligence on who you think fits best, and then have a plan that allows you to go out and execute that. Beyond that, you're dealing with the whims of guys who are being asked to make life-changing decisions for themselves in a compressed amount of time. So there's no way or no guarantee that things are going to turn out the way you want just because you want them to.
Which LA team do you think comes out of this offseason looking better and brighter for the future?
No idea. I mean, and that's tough to, you just don't know. We don't have a way of seeing into the future and knowing who's going to do what and how one decision affects another one in free agency. The smart thing is that the Lakers, Clippers, Knicks, Nets, the four teams in the two biggest markets in the league have put themselves in a position to be buyers in free agency. That in itself is the best win for the league because that means there's a potential for some star movement to big markets that will allow those teams to be competitive. Beyond that, it's all a roll of the dice.
So moving on to the Atlanta Hawks, how do you feel the Hawks will handle the offseason as they have two top picks, potentially both of them being in the top 10, and the most cap space of any team?
Look, I mean, you talk about having to figure out somebody that will take your money and join something that's not a winning product right now. That's the real difficulty in sports is getting somebody to see the vision you have as an organization and signing on for what could be the tougher part, the building years. And when you're trying to get to that level, that's where they are right now. And there's no guarantee, that you're going to get somebody to do it. So you got to take your chance, put yourself out there as an organization, and take some risks.
I mean, while rebuilding, a franchise has to be patient with their cap space, as they still have young players on rookie contracts. They have to be patient and not to spend all of their money on someone who's going to hurt their long-term future assets. I think the Hawks would be a fool to sign anyone this offseason and maintain their cap flexibility and go into a future offseason with a more cap flexibility to sign someone greater when they have a higher prospects, as this offseason has been classified as a top-heavy class. And I think the Hawks still want to be bad and create a young core and then go into the 2020-2021 offseason with this $50 million cap space and be able to sign some great players and create a championship culture down in Atlanta.
2 or 3 max deals.
Who are those players you think they're going to be able to sign them? Because that's the problem. You got to have a crystal ball working about who's going to be available, who's going to be the top-tier talent at that point. And are they guys you can project as helping you transform your organization? I mean, it's an ongoing process is what it boils down to. And opportunity knocks when it knocks. So you can't afford to go into this with a rigid idea of, well, we're going to do this or do that if a great opportunity arises. You got to be flexible enough to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves and then live with the consequences.
I mean, that's what the Sixers have tried to do, is trade for draft assets, and then when a superstar becomes available, find that market and go after that superstar player. Do you think that was the appropriate way to go around rebuilding a franchise, or do you think Sam Hinkie and the rest of the organization made a mistake in how they went about rebuilding the 76ers?
You got to do what works best for you as an organization. That's all there is to it. And Philly did what they thought was best. And here they are. Whether you agree with the process and how they went about it, that's irrelevant because here they are as one of the top teams in the East with a chance, to be a team like that for the foreseeable future. Sam Hinkie took a lot of arrows, but his painstaking process in the end proved to be the right method for Philadelphia.
I mean, you can't argue with results. And obviously, you do the NBA MVP ladder for NBA.com. How do you rank a prospect when the field this season has been so close with Harden, Paul George, and Giannis?
Well, I mean, it's tough. I mean, from week to week, you see who's playing the best. It's a season-long award, so it's not just about what you've done lately. It's also a combination of how that factors into the larger context of your season. I think those three guys, have separated themselves. And really, Giannis and James Harden have even separated from Paul George in terms of who's going to win the award. They got 5 weeks. I think it's going to be a tug of war between Giannis and Harden to the very finish.
And how much do you think the media's obsession with defense or effort and the three-pointer affects into the MVP voting of some of the members? Because some people feel that Giannis' three-point has been a reason not to vote for him. I think that's ridiculous because obviously the 3-point's not everything, and his dominance without a great 3-point shot has been absurd. And he's been growing as a 3-point shooter, and he has moved into the high 30s in this last month as a 3-point shooter.
He's getting more comfortable with the shot.
And I think that's something Ben Simmons should do, is just shoot until it eventually starts falling.
I don't think it's going to affect him in the voting at all. I mean, what's going to be most important is, does this team hold on to the number one spot in Eastern Conference playoff chase, and does he continue to dominate games the way he has? His 3-point shooting is something that you worry about for the future if you're Milwaukee, but it has no bearing on whether or not he's going to win the MVP.
How I assort the MVP, in my opinion, is I believe it should be on a player direct correlation on the team's winning, and how much worse the team is without the player on the court, plus minuses of all players. And I think what Paul George has done with the OKC, it should be deserving a little bit more credit, because obviously he's getting what he deserves as a top 3 MVP candidate. But if you look at Paul George, he's really taken over the scoring role from Russell Westbrook, earned the respect of him, and been able to close out shots in the final minutes of games. If you look at the OKC Thunder without Paul George on the court, or when he's been missing, they've been a lot more dynamic and more defensive efficient and offensively efficient, because with him on the court, it takes away from Westbrook's tendency to ball hog, and not really ball hog, but he's trying to do too much and become the offense. Versus I think Paul George is the most valuable player to the team, versus I think Giannis is the best player in the league.
Well, I think you could make a case and put together numbers and criteria for any guy. And there are people that would tell you that LeBron's absence, for the time he missed with the Lakers and the way they struggle without him, is a strong case for him. And when you talk about the most valuable to his team, the bottom line is the MVP trophy, which doesn't come with a specific set of guidelines for how you select it, is subjective. So the people with votes are allowed to come up with their own theories as to who they think is most valuable. And in my history of not only voting but observing it, is that you're looking at something that combines winning, your overall team winning, with an exceptional individual contribution and performance by the player, and that's usually the metric used to decide who wins that award.
How much do you think the statistics and analytics factor into the voting of some of the voters in the process of the MVP voting?
I mean, it's huge. I mean, for some people, it's bigger than others, but I mean, it's huge. There's no doubt about it. And everybody has to decide what's most important to them. That's what makes the voting so interesting, is that people are coming at it with so many different viewpoints, and what might be important to me might not be important to other voters. So you get a cross section of people voting with their own set of ideas about the award, and that's what gives us the dynamic factors we have in MVP voting.
So something that's really interesting to me is the Ewing effect. What modern players do you believe have this certain characteristic, and how does this affect them as a player?
The what effect? I'm sorry?
The Ewing effect. It's when a superstar player doesn't directly contribute to the winning of a culture or the winning to an organization and franchise. Like when Patrick Ewing left the Knicks, they were able to go further in the playoffs after he got injured, and they were a more complete franchise even though they lost a superstar player.
All right, you mean the Knicks when they went to the finals and Patrick Ewing was on their team?
Yes. Some people call it the Ewing effect. Is when a superstar player is not the main reason the team is they become better without a superstar player. Do you think there's a player like that in the NBA right now?
For example, Kyrie, maybe.
No, I think the Ewing effect is hogwash. I mean, they went to the finals because they had Patrick Ewing, because they had an anchor superstar. Now, did he get there and not play at the elite level he'd been accustomed to? Maybe. But this idea that they would have been there without Patrick Ewing as a part of the franchise is a little bit of revisionist history.
I think that's completely
I was alive when I was observing the league when they went. Believe me, that team without Patrick Ewing involved wouldn't have been an elite team.
How much of the East dominance from that period do you think contributed to the legacy of some players? Because people look down on, or don't look down on Michael Jordan for losing in the early rounds of the Eastern Conference that in his early seasons before the arrival of Scottie Pippen. I think that's something LeBron was trying to do, because losing in the finals is a lot worse than losing in the regular or the second round or the third round of the playoffs. How much do you think that going in that hard Eastern Conference affected some players' legacy?
I think there are always guys who are on the cutting room floor when you talk about winning championships during a dynastic era. Michael Jordan prevented a lot of guys from having championship rings in their careers. The Warriors are doing the same thing to a lot of players now, and that's just the nature of the beast. It's always going to be that way. How many guys would you have heard about from the 60s if the Celtics had won 3 or 4 championships instead of 11? I mean, that's out of people's control. And you can't play against ghosts, as Bill Russell once told me. This idea that you're going to hold guys up to a standard that they can't control based on when they played or when they came along. It's just the way it is. It's just too hard to try and factor in the what ifs and what could have been in a situation where we have some very definite facts that have been a part of the process. You can't. You can relitigate fantasy basketball all you want, but all we have to work with is what's going on and what's happening now and the promise of the future.
I mean, what modern player do you think could be lost in the history books from this Golden State dynasty?
I mean, take your pick. Take your pick of any guy who doesn't win a championship but plays at an elite level while the Warriors are winning these titles. And Reggie Miller, Charles Barkley, as great players they were, Hall of Famers, the first thing anybody says about guys of that era is that, well, he was a great player, but he didn't win a title. Yeah, that's because Michael Jordan was winning them all.
And do you think someone like Karl Malone and John Stockton would have had a higher reputation and cracked the top 10 of some people's All-NBA's list if they were able to play without a LeBron-less team? Obviously, this is all hypothetical, and we can't go back and rewrite history. But do you think that players were discounted because of their lack of championships?
I think players always get knocked for not having championships. It's something that helps build your legacy, but certainly something that can be detrimental as well if you don't get a championship. And that's just the nature of the beast. That happens everywhere. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, guys you can be great. You can be a great individual player and not win a title. That's just the way it is. I don't think it's anything that for a Hall of Famer, an all-time great player to hang his head about. Everybody's not destined to win titles. That's just part of the process. It's been that way forever and will be that way forever.
I mean, how do you grade a player's career looking back on it and seeing if they are a Hall of Fame caliber? What do you look at in a former player to determine if they are a all-time great?
Can you tell the story of the league during his era without him being included? If you can, then he probably doesn't rise to the level of being a Hall of Famer. If you can't, that's usually a great indicator that he was a Hall of Famer. Guys, I hate to cut it short, but I gotta head into the Hawks game here. I appreciate your invitation, and hope it goes well for you guys, and appreciate all the good questions.
Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
That means,
all right, guys.
Means a lot.
It means a lot.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Take care.